Okay, everyone, welcome back. Super happy to have Ioannis joining the show. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
How is life in Athens and Greece today? We just talked about COVID. Can you give a snapshot into the situation? You were all wearing masks in the start here.
We're wearing masks in the office. I've taken mine off for the interview, and for the podcast. Well, let's put it this way: on Sunday, a lot of us were swimming still. Today's a little bit grey, but still warm. COVID is unfortunately getting worse. So we have the government, as of today, has shut down all restaurants and bars. And there's a curfew between midnight and 5 in the morning. Obligatory 50% working from home, at least. And mask wearing inside and outside everywhere, unless you are, exercising or walking on your own outside. But if you are in a city with other people on the pavement or anything, everybody has to wear masks.
What gives you more stress in life? Owning Panathinaikos or running a shipping company which is family owned?
Of course, owning Panathinaikos, unfortunately, yes. Which was whilst owning Panathinaikos was an accident, my shipping site was not an accident. I chose it.
Can you quickly just use 2 minutes, because there's so many that love football and sports? Can you explain the quotes I read today that you said, this is not fixable, so I just have to leave Panathinaikos? The problems are so deeply rooted that I can't fix it even if I tried?
Well, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, in the last 2 or 3 years, it's been getting better. But let's say for the last 15, 20 years, we've had a lot of corruption in football in Greece. And this has, if you look at the stadiums, they were full of supporters back in the late 90s, even early 2000s. But the last 10 years, the stadiums are empty because nobody trusts the results and refereeing was very bad, etc. However, in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of big effort has been made by more or less everybody, and things have been improving. So hopefully, football will become more manageable in Greece.
Just to explain, is this because of the betting industry, that people bet on games?
No, I think it was, well, first of all, one big issue is Champions League. For example, television rights for the 3 or 4 main big Greek teams, more popular Greek teams, vary, I guess, between 5 and 10 million euros a year, depending on the position and the team. Whilst income from the Champions League is like 30 million, plus added revenue from tickets, plus added revenue from making your players known so you can sell them at a much higher price. So I think that some people were after, they try to win the championship every year in order to make a lot of money. And this has happened. And of course, these teams have been much more competitive than other teams. And this is the problem. And Greece, having gone through a big recession, a big crisis, financial crisis, until I guess a year ago or so, this has also reduced advertising, sponsors. In general, there's been economic malaise here, which has, of course, reflected on football as well.
What's your best time in 100-meter sprint? If I understood my research correctly, you're quite an athlete growing up.
I wasn't, I was not that fast. I was 10.9 seconds.
Was that the biggest hobby, running, or do you like football?
I still run for exercise, but I didn't like running long distance when I was a sprinter. But as I got older, I guess I have no choice.
I don't know if you're familiar with the founder behind Nike, but he had so many bad times during building the Nike business that he had to run away from the problems. So he really enjoyed long runs. I don't know if you use that in your life as well, or if the business is more solid.
Running has been a big companion in stressful times.
Can you
And that,
describe your family company, just to give maybe the listeners a bit of an insight, because there are many people that are not familiar with the family story, and maybe also how you came to be in that story,
yeah,
a bigger
sure.
person.
My father started investing. He was a civil engineer, and he had an engineering construction company. But in the 60s, early 60s, mid 60s, he started investing in small second-hand general cargo ships. As by the 70s, he was exclusively in shipping with a dry cargo fleet. And until 1984, my family was exclusively in dry cargo. And I, for some reason, I always liked tankers a lot. And I started my own business back in 1983, 84 in tankers. And in fact, I was after a small local contract at the time, and because I had no knowledge of the tanker market and how to calculate costs in tankers, I asked a Norwegian friend, Axel Lorentzen at the time, to help me out, and I came to Oslo, and we sat down, and he helped me calculate the cost per ton of the cargo that was to be lifted for the small contract I was after, and I got that contract, and that's how I started my shipping career, with chartering small ships, 20,000-ton product carriers moving fuel, and that was my first entry into tankers. And after that, dry cargo, after the oil crisis of the late 70s, was in a terrible depression. As were tankers, in fact. And I guess there was a big company, Japanese company called Sanko. They had like 300 Aframaxes. They went bankrupt in 84, 85. And at that time, tankers, the price was extremely depressed. To give you an idea, an Aframax of 10 years or 9 years would cost $3 million or below $2.7 million a ship, which is absolutely ridiculous if you think about how much they cost now, how much they cost when they were built, which gave us an opportunity to invest in extremely cheap tankers and start the tanker phase of the company. That's how it all started.
When you say you don't know why you had that passion, can you identify that moment? I don't think you suddenly wake up with an interest for it.
No, I thought, dry cargo, I found dry cargo extremely boring, slow, tedious, and with very limited upside. In dry cargo, of course, there are expert companies who know who have contracts of affreightment and who can combine back holes and front holes, etc., and they can improve the returns. But in most cases, I found dry cargo very boring and slow. Whilst tankers, I was following tankers, and they were much more volatile. And if you got your timing right, and if you were good at what you were doing, you could have very significant results. And this is something outside, I guess, 2008, 2007, when, because of China, dry cargo went absolutely irrationally crazy. This has been the case always with tankers versus dry cargo. So I like the speed of tankers. I like the speed. In other words, you have very few cargoes, crude oil, fuel oil. Of course, they have some differences, but basically there's very few cargoes, and there's a world scale, which effectively, in theory, equalizes the returns on a ship, regardless of which round voyage you choose. I mean, from a specific loading port to any discharge port, ballasting back. In theory, you should be making the same amount, which also helps things move much more quickly. And also in tankers, there are many more opportunities to do clever things in tankers when you charter them. My best period in my business career when I was actually actively chartering ships, this was the most fascinating part of my career. I yearn, I miss those days. Now I have, I guess I have a more strategic role. Yeah.
Can you explain your day when your analysis are being punched in Excel sheets? What are you looking for? Is it sort of this like macro stuff, and then you make a strategy, or is it volatile? So you day to day change your strategy based on momentum. How would you describe the way you view the world in your strategic positions?
Okay, the macro side of things is extremely important, and this is I think you have to base your decisions on if you sell ships, buy ships, on the macro information that you have. But outside that, there is a micro universe, a daily universe, which is also extremely important. And in tankers, if you get the right cargoes, if you have the right contacts, if you have good ships that can take it, that any charterer will accept or prefer, you can really outperform the average earnings of a specific type of tanker if you're good at what you're doing. So macro helps you decide what ships you want and when to sell and when to buy. Micro is very important also. The day-to-day business is also extremely important in tankers.
And in high performance, in your mind, I guess you need to know the difference and the synergies between those two, and you have to be able to navigate them both correctly, right? Can you just be a macro guy and just like lean back and relax, or do you also need to be in the micro?
Yes. Your returns will be lower, but you certainly can. I think the important part for success is not to buy expensive ships and to sell ships at the right time. That's the most important part. So you can do that and put them on time charter or even put them in a pool or something and not bother with the daily stuff outside deciding when you will sell them. But if you run your business on a day-to-day basis as well, aggressively, I think you can improve your results quite dramatically.
If people are not into shipping industry, what analogies can you bring? Do you think it's similar the way the airline industry works, or do you feel shipping is one of a kind? Or do you think you can be influenced and inspired by other industries that has the same dynamics playing out?
I have never thought of that, actually. But very, very superficially, since shipping is very volatile, I don't know, maybe I was going to say hotel business or airline business, perhaps, where you have seasonality and you have, let's say, oversupply or undersupply. But of course, in shipping, things can change much more quickly because within 2 or 3 years, a lot of ships can be ordered and built. And the market can be flooded with too many ships. No, I think shipping is quite unique. I don't think that there are direct similarities with any other industry that I at least know.
When you make tough decisions, how much is data-driven? How much is gut feeling, given the experience you and your family have in the industry? Is it a combination, or do you feel like this is a data-driven industry and you need to understand the numbers?
It's a combination. I think gut is very important, but you have to take gut within the parameters of numbers and reality. So you cannot ignore the situation, how many ships there are, what season it is, how is consumption of oil moving, how much oil is on storage, etc. But gut is very important.
Could you introduce the company, since it's on the stock exchange, in a good way for people, and maybe not too technical at the start, so we can bring people along discussing this company?
Yeah, very briefly, I'll tell you how we got to the point of starting the company. OET Tankers, which was went to public in 2012, 2018. Sorry, something else started in 2012. Okay, we were in shipping since as a tankers since the early 80s, and I had my own business, but I was also working with my father. And what we did basically was try to sell ships at a high price and buy ships at a relatively low price. This was, let's say, augmented by when technological changes were happening, which were usually driven for ecological reasons. For example, when I started tankers back in the early 80s, ships didn't have, of course, double hulls. They didn't even have segregated ballast tanks. They had something that I think euphemistically was called clean ballast tanks, which meant that you could use certain cargo tanks where you would load crude to load ballast, and you would discharge that ballast legally in the sea. I don't know, you were too young probably, but maybe 20 years ago, if you remember, some of our listeners remember, there was a lot of tar on the beaches, which has now almost disappeared. And that was because ships were actually discharging legally, ballast from tanks that had carried oil in the sea. So in the mid 80s, late 80s, this changed, and ships which had clean ballast tanks were replaced by ships that had segregated ballast tanks, which meant that ships had to be a little bit bigger so they could have more cubic capacity to have separate ballast tanks from cargo tanks. So that was one big step that we followed. We sold quickly our CBT fleet and replaced it with segregated ballast fleet tank. Then the other big change, and when we got another opportunity to buy and sell ships, was after the Exxon Valdez. It was decided that single hull ships for tankers were dangerous because a simple, let's say, a puncture of the hull would result in very substantial pollution, and ships changed to double hull. Again, at that time, we sold our segregated ballast tank ships, and we started from that time on, I guess early 90s, we started, late 80s, early 90s, we started ordering our own ships, and since then, with very few exceptions, we haven't, in the last 15 years, we haven't bought any second-hand ships. We have built all our fleet in specific yards. We started building our ships in Japan, at the time NKK. Today then they became JMU. The JMU, now they're Universal. It's a Hyundai, IHI, which was a big shipyard, NKK and Hitachi merged, and they become now JMU. But as the millennium changed, Japanese yards started becoming too expensive, and also they were not very flexible in the designs they were producing, etc. So we slowly moved to Korea, and now we build all our ships in Korea. So back in 2018, I think actually we started 17 in the winter. We knew of the IMO changes that were coming along with 2020, where the fuel had, from 2020, fuel has to be of, the content of sulfur in fuel has to be very low. And we saw a big opportunity to expand a lot in ships that are minimizing their consumption, thus minimizing also the CO2 that their
emissions.
Thank you. That obviously when you burn this oil, you have much lower emissions. And what we also saw that after 2015, in 2015, you got a first big effort, parenthesis. It wasn't really the first effort. The first effort took place in the early 80s, late 70s, because at the time, most ships had turbine engines. And for example, if the LCC was burning 100 and 150 tons a day, what's today it burns 40, a modern ship. And because of the oil crisis, when oil became very expensive, the turbines, which were very good, very efficient, simple engines, were replaced by diesel engines, which is slow-speed diesel engines, which is what we have also today. So we had a big move for economizing consumption then. But after that, there was a progressive move as engines were improving. And every year you could get a few grams per hour, per horsepower less, 1 gram, 2 grams per horsepower. But the big change started happening in 2015, when you had the first generation of eco ships, which were burning significantly less fuel than older ships. And then the second generation, which came after 2017, 2018, which were dramatically more efficient. And on top of that, of course, we had the big issue with scrubbers. Scrubber is a piece of equipment that basically the emissions from the main engine go through a shower of seawater, where the sulfur is separated from the rest of the emissions, and thus you can actually burn heavy sulfur fuel with super eco ships that are equipped also with scrubbers. And heavy sulfur fuel is much cheaper than lower sulfur fuel. Anyway, so we saw this as an opportunity, and of course, Norway, we started speaking with Norwegian investment banks, and I always knew from the start of my shipping career that, and of course I have followed it over the decades, that Norway is probably the most advanced nation in the world shipping-wise, and we felt that the investors in Norway would understand what we were talking about when we were talking about scrubbers and IMO 2020, and we wouldn't have to explain everything from scratch to investors who were not familiar with shipping, like the Norwegian market was. So we decided to go to Norway, and we successfully raised some equity. We contributed the ships we had, and we expanded our fleet, and we've done quite well as far as we're concerned. We're quite happy with our performance. So that's how it started. And now we're in the axis. We're in the axis in the Oslo Stock Exchange axis, and I think we'll probably move up very soon. We have all the preconditions to do that. Yeah, of course, COVID came and changed everything. We had different plans for this year, but COVID, we were going to sell some ships this year, which was something we had told our investors from day one. We're still doing all right.
Can you explain why, in your perspective, Norway is hotspot for shipping? Is it a combination of the Viking era, etc., and the right people and the right money? Or is it coincidence because you have other nations like Portugal and other that also should be good in shipping based on their history? Why do you think Norway has that position you think it has?
Well, history is extremely important. And, whether it's Norway, Portugal, or Greece, historical factors have played a very important role in these countries having a close contact with the sea. Having said that, for a number of reasons, I guess in some ways there are some similarities between Greece and Norway. Both countries were relatively poor compared with other neighbors or European countries before the discovery of oil by Norway. And I guess a lot of people didn't have a lot of alternatives but to go to sea and to become merchants and to try to expand their business and succeed through shipping. So I think this, together with the fact that conditions in Norway, being in the North Sea, and are very severe, which means that the Norwegian shipping naval people have to be historically very knowledgeable and experienced to survive. When the opportunities came and oil was discovered, all this tradition enabled the Norwegian companies to develop a lot of expertise in all different kinds of shipping, including offshore exploration of shipping, exploration for oil. Today, the same thing goes for, wind turbines that are being installed at sea, etc. And I think because of this, because shipping was a very important part of Norwegian life, and because of the historical tradition that Norway had in shipping, I think this is the reason why it has developed so much. In other countries that are wealthier than Norway, or were now with oil, of course, Norway is extremely wealthy, but per capita, but bigger countries with much bigger populations, and they had also you could, make ketchup and make money, or make Heinz, Tabasco. I'm watching CNN these days with the saga with the American elections, and they have this program for 100-year-old companies, and they said, for example, how the company that makes Tabasco was created, and this is a huge business. I mean, but this became a huge business because the United States is a big country. We couldn't really make a Tabasco company in Greece with a small population, or Norway, and we start from there and export it everywhere else. So I think that the history plus coincidences like the fact that there was a lot of oil discovered in Norwegian waters, I think that this helped create a nation that's very experienced and very knowledgeable in shipping, like Norway.
I feel like
also another thing is that Norway is also very transparent. Institutions work in Norway, which is also extremely important for a business, for a country to flourish. You cannot have a country flourishing without the rule of law or the respect for the law. And Norway has that transparency in this respect, which is also extremely important.
I agree. You talked a bit about sort of this green opportunity that we have seen in shipping now. We did the podcast with 2020 bulkers, etc. But from your perspective, how do you separate in business sort of this greenwashing? Because green trends come all the time, but there has to be some value to be captured. And how do you define a green opportunity market-wise? Because those are not the same always. Like, we can talk about green trends a lot, but it doesn't mean it's a great business.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing when you are running a tanker fleet or a shipping fleet to talk about green, because at the end of the day, you do burn oil and you do pollute. I mean, something that has to happen, of course, because goods have to be moved. But I think we're talking about minimizing the energy we use and thus minimizing emissions. And because with global warming, the situation is deteriorating continuously, and the world has to take decisions to minimize this development. I think energy efficient ships, which I think is a fairer way of describing ships, although we call, of course, our company is called Okeanis eco tankers, which again is a euphemism in my opinion. But in any case, energy efficient ships are becoming more and more important because of that, because they emit less de facto by burning less oil.
Agree. We had some a bit technical questions from Twitter. I just want to take them because one of the sender of them are a relative big shareholder in your company. So I think his Twitter name goes something like Original Bryler or something. But if you can start by describing the discount control mechanism, and then we can work our way from there. What is the concept?
As I said previously, a very important element in our strategy is to sell ships at the right time. So when the company was conceived and started, and we had our first board meeting, incidentally, the board members, the board owns like 78% of the company. We have 3 American directors who are from big funds and with a lot of experience in shipping, and we take their view. This is extremely helpful for us because we are not experienced, obviously, with public markets, and having part of our board having top class people who have a completely different experience from us is extremely useful. So at that time, when we conceived the company and we had our first board meeting, we decided to have a mechanism by which if prices fell, if our stock price fell and our NAV was much higher, we would sell ships and buy back our shares. That's what the mechanism is. We said that this would be effective after 21. And that is something, of course, buying back shares, whether it's from sale of ships or whether it's from free cash flow that the company makes, is always on our mind. And it's a very difficult decision. In any case, we have a special committee in our board that from January 21 will consider whether it's more profitable, more advantageous for the company to sell ships and buy back shares if it is feasible. And that's what the discount mechanism is. And thus try and buy back shares so that our share price goes back to NAV. Now it's, in my opinion, ridiculously low. It's significantly below NAV, even though we are making profits every quarter and distributing dividends.
Why is that, do you think? If you say it's ridiculously low.
I think that, I always believe that in general in stocks, all of us, all humans, we have a herd mentality. When something is good, we all rush and buy things. And when it's bad, we all run away. And this goes also for, including myself. This is our instinct. And that's one reason. The second reason is that shipping has been it's a very dangerous investment for people who do not know shipping. There have been a lot of instances where shipping companies have gone bankrupt and the investors have lost all their money. So I think, understandably, people are very skeptical. But the main reason why the share is low is because there's a herd mentality, and because with all COVID, with all the adventures we had with, oil wars, Russia, Saudi Arabia, excessive oil being produced, oil tankers storing oil, all the land storage being full. Understandably, there's a lot of pessimism regarding tankers. So understandably, people run away from tankers. I think it's a mistake. I'm not saying this because it's our company. In fact, the price of our share is not the most important factor for me, because from the beginning, what we had said even in the roadshow that we were doing is that our objective, we are investors. So our objective is to distribute free cash flow as dividends and sell ships and distribute the free cash from the ships we sell as dividends, full stop. This has been a successful model for us for many decades. And that's the main thing we want to follow, and we will follow now. And as I told you from the beginning, we were planning to sell 5 ships in 2021, specific ships, the oldest ships in the fleet. There were 3 ships built in 2015, which are the oldest ships built in the fleet. And then we had the ship built in 2016 and one in 2017, which are the second oldest ships. And we wanted to sell them and give back the equity to our shareholders. Unfortunately, COVID came along and this has postponed things. Parenthesis here, we're extremely bullish for tankers. We think that after sometime after the summer of next year, things will start normalizing very rapidly. And because there's a very small order book, and a lot of uncertainty regarding propulsion, what fuels will be used in the future, etc. I think the order book will remain small. And at the same time, we have an aging fleet. And in tankers, an aging fleet is much more serious than in other sectors. A lot of oil terminals will not accept a ship that's over 15 years old. A lot of time charters will not time charter ships that are over 10 years old. And a lot of countries impose certain restrictions, environmental restrictions. So I think all the ships have a major handicap versus modern ships. And this will also help create an extremely firm market in the next 1 or 2 years.
But just to emphasize your point, it's kind of the same you see in the tech stocks. It's not like the valuation is fine, everyone can judge it, but it's kind of that herd mentality. So, but if you look at the metrics, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I think when you asked me earlier whether there's an industry that's similar to shipping, one could say the stock market is the closest thing to shipping, where, macro elements determine to a great effect what happens to the stock market, together with, of course, micro development, profits of companies, and day-to-day things that also propel prices. Yeah, it's something like that. I agree with you, and yeah.
Just another question. I don't think you need to answer it that long, but in terms of the shareholders, it seems like you're very aligned even with the smallest investors as well. Is that a coincidence, or is it? Yeah, can you explain a bit the philosophy?
We are shareholders.
Yeah, I agree.
So we want to maximize the returns on our shares. We have by far the lowest management cost compared to all our peers. Significantly lower management costs. We run the business at break even as managers. We don't care to have a big fleet. We want to maximize our profits, and that's the absolute core of this business is make money operating ships and make money selling ships, and later perhaps consider replacing the fleet privately or through another entity or even through Okeanis. But this is the thing is buy, sell, operate, and make profits. So this is the sole purpose of our business. It's not be big or be good or be better or bigger or whatever. We run a very good operation. We also, we love our charters, and our charters love us because we are good to them and they're good to us. And we have first-class ships, of course. They're very young ships, and we have a very high-quality management as well. This is it.
You compared shipping with the stock market. Then the biggest question that it's very hard to answer is how do you separate luck and skill? Because you can be lucky in many years.
Okay.
You can't?
You can. Okay. Without luck, it's extremely difficult to do, I think, extremely well. But it's also extremely difficult to do extremely well without skill. So it has to be a combination. I think being skillful, for example, I think if we had not seen the fact that technologically ships were changing and that with IMO 2020, older ships would become much less competitive. And when I'm talking about older ships, I mean ships within 2012, 2011. I'm not talking about 20-year-old ships. I'm talking about 80-year-old ships or 70-year-old ships. If we hadn't perceived that, which we perceived because we follow our business and we live it day to day, we would not have done what we did. But we were also lucky that, let's say, we were in a situation where we had a relatively small fleet back in the mid-2010s, which we sold, and we had the opportunity to renew the whole fleet effectively. Now, if we had 50 ships or 30 ships in our hands in 2015, 16, we wouldn't have the opportunity to create such a modern, efficient fleet, and that's luck. Because when we had fewer ships in 2015, it was not because we thought that IMO would come along in 2020 and change the fuel and everything else, and it was just that we had found opportunities to sell ships, and we had sold the fleet out without seeing the macro elements being so attractive as to go and order a lot of ships. Yeah.
But I feel also the best are very good at taking advantage of macro situations and making their own luck, right? I don't feel like...
Yeah.
That's at least my point. I wanted to just talk a bit about macro as well. Can you take us back to 2007, 2008? Because when I studied business, Greece was a perfect example of how not to run a government. Can you take us back to 2008 and explain, since you lived there?
What happened in Greece, you mean?
Yes.
About Greece? Yeah, okay. Well, it's a very sad story.
Agree.
Greece, our financings were okay until 2004, 2005, 2006. And in fact, Greece was growing and we had a very good growth in our GDP. Wages were rising, were going up, which was extremely positive. Unemployment was extremely low and everybody was very happy. But unfortunately, we got a government that, although a conservative government, and they had, whilst promising all the right things about their fiscal policy and the measures that we're planning to take to keep the economy going and have a healthy economy. They did the opposite. They hired a very large number of civil servants. They wasted money. So when Lehman Brothers came and countries that had huge debts and huge deficits were hit very hard. And unfortunately, after, let's say, 4 or 5 years of 3 or 4 years of that government, our debt had swollen, and we were running also a very big deficit. So this combined with the world recession and the financial crisis resulted in effectively Greece going bankrupt. This was a very, very difficult situation, of course. A lot of money lost, a lot of people lost all their wealth. Wages came down dramatically. So unfortunately, the minimum wage in Greece now is something like 700-900 euros a month. At the time, it was more like 1,200 euros, 10 years ago, effectively. Everything, a lot of the biggest disaster that happened was that a lot of we have quite an educated, we're educated in Greece, and a lot of Greeks were educated left and went abroad to work in businesses, as doctors, as banks, and which was a huge brain drain, and that's something that's the most difficult thing to although some Greeks are coming back now, to correct, because there's a lot of educated, capable Greeks with experience in business or in a science that have left and are working abroad. And how do you get them back, especially when still wages are low here?
But the narrative that I was taught in Norway, I don't think it's necessarily the right one, but I'm just like collecting memories in my head. It was that in Greece you expect to retire when you're like 50 years old. Is that totally off, or how's the culture component in that piece?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the seeds of this crisis, of the bankruptcy of Greece, were laid in the 80s. When we had a socialist, extremely populist government, which effectively taught Greeks and that the government is obligated to pay for everybody. You don't have to work to get paid. Corruption creeped in as well in that period, in the 80s. And Greek society changed. One of the problems and one of the reasons why in the 2000s, when the economy collapsed, we had such huge deficits, was that we had an extremely expensive retirement program and pension program. And there were a lot of very privileged sectors, unions, especially unions that were very powerful, like, for example, the Public Power Corporation. They were retiring, I don't know whether it was 50, maybe it was 55 or 57. Women, I mean, mothers could retire when they were, let's say, something like 42, 45, because they were mothers. Of course, it didn't make a lot of sense, because at 42, 45, your children are usually older. So why do you get the benefit there? But anyway, this was populism. This, what you said about Greece being inefficient and people getting pensions very young is absolutely true. I'll just give you one example to understand. This is not exactly, it's also relating to, of course, to the age people retire, but I know somebody who's running a TV station, and his father was an officer in the Greek army. He fought the Second World War against Italy, then he fought against Germany, then he went to Egypt and continued fighting with the Allies after Greece was occupied by the Germans. And he came back. We had a communist upheaval in Greece, sponsored by the Soviet Union. So we had a civil war for 3 or 4 years. He fought in the civil war. Then he was sent to Korea. He fought in Korea. He finally became the head of the Greek army, the chief of staff of the Greek army. And then he, of course, at some point he retired. Now my friend was working at the state post office, and he had a clerk who had retired. The pension that he got, the clerk, his driver, and it was his driver, was 4,500 euros a month. Whilst the general got 2,500 euros a month. And the post office, because they had a strong union and they got very good terms, they could retire them at 45, 47, whilst the general, of course, retired a little bit later. Of course, officers retire relatively young, not necessarily, of course, the general. So this was it. It was a very twisted and unfair system that had prevailed in Greece.
A lot of the entrepreneurs today, and it goes for myself, are like born global. They doesn't really care where they live. They just want to build stuff if they're interested in entrepreneurship and business. What would they typically find in Greece? If you say it's like some people left Greece, does that mean it's a great opportunity, or does it mean it's very hard to build stuff in Greece? How does that component look in your head?
Again, because of populism and the socialist governments we had in the past, Greece is not a very business-friendly nation, although this is changing quite quickly now. There are opportunities in Greece because there are a lot of gaps in Greece, from real estate to tourism, and from tourism to, for example, Tesla is making an investment here. Microsoft is making a big investment in Greece now. There's a lot of virgin ground, or there's a lot of room for development in Greece. I don't know. Taxes are still high. But,
but basically it's not like it's not heaven for entrepreneurs.
No, it's not like Ireland, let's put it this way.
Time is going fast. I just have a couple of more questions. I don't know, you can decide which one you want to answer, but we have to touch a bit upon the history. There have been some smart people, philosophers in Greece. Can you just talk about your favorite people from Greece, even if it's philosophy and stoicism, because you have some trends in the world that a lot of those ideas that were born there are coming to life again in like the civilization.
Okay. Modern Greece is a mirage from ancient Greece. Modern Greece exists because of ancient Greece, because nations didn't exist 200-300 years ago. It was mainly kings and lords and princes who owned the land, and there were just people working the land. And European history, middle classes developed, etc., etc. And then we had eventually democracy. Now, so everything is based on ancient Greece, and had it not been for ancient Greece, if you look at Greek history, Greece effectively ceased to exist a few centuries after the Romans took over Greece. And then, of course, the Eastern Roman Empire, which became the Byzantine Empire, effectively was Greece. And the Greek language was spoken there in Byzantium. And the Byzantium was a Christian empire, and using the Greek language. So when the Turks took over Greece and other areas, they reached Vienna in Austria and parts of Hungary, etc., the whole Balkans. Greece survived because of the language, which was a church language. So if you had to be an educated Greek, an educated person in this part of the world, your only choice would be learning the Greek language through the church. So effectively, the Greek language and the Christianity kept Greece wasn't Greece at the time, so it's difficult to say.
Yeah.
Kept society, let's say, connected.
Exactly.
And so in this respect, we owe everything to ancient Greece. And of course, democracy and philosophy and ethics, etc., were part of the ancient Greek philosophy. And since modern Greece is a mirage from ancient Greece, and not necessarily a good mirage, a lot of these elements were taken here.
Agree. Just one quick final question, Ioannis. It's been great talking to you. What do you say to people when they ask you, what is your best advice to succeed in business or shipping? Do you say, figure it out yourself, it's your own journey, or do you say, do X, Y, Z?
Work hard, like everything else, I guess. Have a lot of imagination. And, believe that you can achieve almost everything, whether you have money or not, in shipping. But you have to be clever and lucky, as we said. Work hard, be clever, and have some luck.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Pleasure.
Hi everyone, Christopher here again. Just a few things before you leave the show. If you like this episode, it would be great if you could give it a review and also share it with your professional network. If you want to get in touch with me, Twitter is the place. Just go to @Vonheim. You can also find this information in the show notes. Hope to see you tune in to the next episode and take care.